She had one rule after Marcus: never let another man hold her fate in his hands. She broke it in 3 seconds, in the middle of a crowd, in the arms of a stranger whose name she didn't even know. It was supposed to be one dance, one lie, long enough for Marcus to look away and for her to disappear. Again. She had gotten good at disappearing, at shrinking, at surviving. But the stranger didn't let go when the song ended. And when she finally looked up at him, really looked, she understood that she had not fallen into safety. She had fallen into something far more complicated. He was calculated. He was cold in the way only very dangerous men can afford to be. And he wanted something from her too, though he hadn't said so yet. What she didn't know was that the man she had chosen at random in that crowd of thousands held a secret that connected him, directly, to the man she was running from. What she didn't know was that the audio file still buried in her phone, the one she had never listened to twice because it made her hands shake, was about to bring down men whose names appeared in federal case files on 2 continents. And what neither of them knew, not yet, was that they were both about to lose the careful, armored lives they had built, and that losing them would be the best thing that ever happened. This is the story of one night that became everything, of a lie that told the truth, of 2 people who used each other, and then, somehow, chose each other. Stay. You'll want to see how this ends. If you love stories like this, subscribe. New stories every day. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Naya's place? The Indigo Sky Music Festival arrived every August in Charlotte, North Carolina, the way summer storms do, loud and inevitable, filling the city's lungs with bass and lights and the smell of bodies pressed together under open sky. It was the kind of event where no one knew anyone, but everyone pretended otherwise, and the crowd moved as one enormous, careless organism through the grounds of Marshall Park. Naya Sterling had not planned to be there. She had bought the ticket in March, back when she still believed in plans. Back when the lease on her apartment in Atlanta had felt stable, and her job at the nonprofit felt meaningful, and the man she had spent 2 years believing in had not yet shown her the precise shape of who he really was. She had bought it with her best friend, Kezia, who had since moved to London for a graduate program and left Nia with 2 tickets, a half-empty bottle of rum, and the suggestion to go anyway and have a good time. Kezia did not know about Marcus. Not all of it. Nobody knew all of it. Nia was 27 years old, and she had spent most of those years learning, in one form or another, that the people who were supposed to hold her, her mother, the men she loved, the systems she trusted, held her only long enough to need something back. She had adapted. She had become extraordinarily good at reading rooms, at staying light on her feet, at not needing too much from anyone. She called it independence. A therapist she had seen once, briefly, called it something else. She had come to the festival alone. She wore a yellow sundress that Kezia had picked out for her 2 summers ago, and she had her phone in her hand, and a plastic cup of something cold and sweet, and she had been, for approximately 40 minutes, doing something that felt almost like being okay. Then she saw him. Marcus Reeves was across the lawn, maybe 60 feet away, standing in a small group of men in dark clothes who all shared the same particular quality of stillness. The stillness of people who had never needed to look around nervously because other people looked around nervously for them. He was not scanning the crowd. He didn't have to. He had people for that. But one of those people was already looking at Naya. She felt it before she saw it, that specific cold pressure behind her sternum, the one that had lived there for 8 months and had only recently begun to fade. It came back all at once, like a hand closing around something internal. She turned her face away. She made herself breathe. She thought, he doesn't see me. He's in Charlotte by coincidence. This is a festival. There are 10,000 people here. Then the man looking at her said something to Marcus, and Marcus turned. Nia moved. She did not run. Running drew attention, and drawing attention was the last thing she needed. She walked fast, weaving through the crowd with the kind of purposeful calm she had practiced so many times it had become reflex. She headed toward the densest part of the main stage crowd, where the bodies were tightest, and the lights were low, and she could disappear inside the noise. She made it 40 feet. She glanced back once, 1 second, just to check. And through the shifting crowd, she caught a glimpse of Marcus moving. Not rushing, just moving, with that particular direction that told her everything she needed to know. Her heart became a fist. She turned back to the crowd and made a decision in the half-second she had available. There was a man directly in front of her, tall, very still in the way that struck her as unusual for a festival crowd, in a dark linen shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbows, standing with 2 other men who were talking loudly over the music, while he watched the stage with an expression that suggested he found none of this particularly entertaining. Nia put her hand on his arm. He turned, and his eyes, dark, sharp, and extraordinarily calm, found her face. She leaned in close enough to be heard over the music, and she said, very quietly, "Could you dance with me? My ex is watching." For exactly 2 seconds, he looked at her. Not through her, not over her shoulder, at her, like he was reading something. Then something in his expression shifted, infinitesimally, and he turned slightly toward his companions. "Excuse me," he said to them, in English that carried the faint, precise quality of a second language spoken better than most people spoke their first. Then he turned back to her, and he took her hand, and he said, "Of course." He danced the way he seemed to do everything else, with complete economy of movement and no performance at all. His hand settled at her waist like it had been there before, not possessive, not uncertain, but simply present, the way you hold something you have been handed and intend to be careful with. He kept appropriate distance, aware, she understood immediately, that she was a stranger, and that strangers had limits. But he was also close enough that anyone looking would see exactly what he intended them to see. She had expected this to feel wrong. The manufactured closeness, the borrowed language of intimacy between 2 people who had exchanged exactly 9 words. She had expected the performance to sit uncomfortably on her skin, as performances had always done. Instead, she found herself surprised by how easily she fell into the rhythm of it, how the body's muscle memory of dancing with someone overrode the strangeness of the person. Or maybe it was him. The particular quality of his stillness was transmissible. She could feel it working on her like pressure, steady and directionless, and her heartbeat, which had been a controlled emergency since she spotted Marcus, began, slowly, to unclench. "Is he still looking?" he asked, low enough that only she could hear. She glanced past his shoulder, using the movement as part of the dance. Marcus was at the edge of the crowd now. She could see him, the way he was scanning, patient and methodical, like a man who was very good at finding things that did not want to be found. She had spent 8 months being a thing that did not want to be found. And there was something in watching him work that made her understand, fully, for the first time, what she had been up against. "Yes, don't look." "I wasn't going to." A pause. "How long has he been following you?" "He's not." She stopped herself. "I don't know if following is the right word." "What's the right word?" She didn't answer, because she didn't have one that she was willing to give to a stranger. She had spent 8 months not giving the right words to anyone. Not Kezia, not her mother, not the one co-worker at her new job who had once asked, gently, if she was okay, and who had accepted her fine without pressing. She had been so careful with the information, so certain that spreading it meant spreading the danger, that she had compressed everything into herself until it had become its own kind of toxin. She focused on looking comfortable, on looking like a woman who had chosen to be here, in these arms, at this moment. He let it go. "My name is Jun Young. Nia." "Nia." He said it simply, like he was cataloging it. Not filing it, cataloging it, which was different, which implied he would take it out and use it. "The 2 men I was with, they are business partners, American. They have been skeptical of me since I arrived in this country 3 weeks ago. There is a deal I need to close, and they don't trust me yet." He turned her slightly, repositioning them with an efficiency that was so smooth, she almost didn't register that he'd done it. and she understood it was tactical, blocking Marcus's sightline with his own body. A man with a woman is a different kind of man, to people like them. Less threatening, more human. She processed this with the part of her brain that was not still counting Marcus's distance from her body. She was running the full calculation. What he wanted, what it would cost her, whether this was simply a different shape of the trap. She had become very good at that kind of processing. She had needed to be, so you need this too. It is convenient for both of us. Yes. There it was. Not rescue, a transaction. She was surprised to find that this steadied her. She understood transactions. Transactions had terms and limits and an endpoint you could see from the beginning. Romance had always been the thing that blindsided her. The gradual shift of terms without announcement. The deal that changed after you'd already committed. A transaction with a stranger was almost restful by comparison. How long? She asked. The evening. My partners want to have dinner at 9. If you come to dinner, and you seem comfortable with me, it will help. And in return, I will make sure your ex-boyfriend does not come within 10 feet of you tonight. She looked at him then, really looked, and she tried to read the intention in his face. It was a face that had been trained to give very little away. She could sense the training in it, the practiced quality of its composure. But there were things that training couldn't fully suppress. And one of them was the specific quality of honesty in a person who is making an offer they mean. He did not look like a man making a romantic gesture. He looked like a man running calculations, which was somehow more reassuring. Romantic gestures had always cost her more than she'd expected. They came with an invisible invoice. He's not my ex-boyfriend, she said quietly. He's more complicated than that. Noted. And I'll need to know your full name. Jun-Young Kang. She blinked. Something moved at the back of her mind. The vague recognition of a name she had seen somewhere. Business news, maybe. Technology. Seoul. A conference or an acquisition. Something with numbers large enough to make it into the kind of publication she didn't read but occasionally passed. Jun-Young Kang was 33 years old and ran a conglomerate with operations on 3 continents, though she would not confirm that until later, when she looked him up from the hotel room with her coffee going cold beside her. For now, she filed the name away. Names meant nothing until context met them. Okay, she said. One evening. He nodded. Once. He's moving away. She exhaled, a long, careful breath that she had been holding for what felt like 10 minutes. The fist in her chest loosened, just slightly. The music came back into her awareness, and the warmth of the crowd, and the smell of summer, cut grass and food vendors, and the sweet chemical smell of festival lights warming up. The world, which had been reduced to a single point of danger, expanded again into something habitable. Jun-Young did not loosen his hand at her waist. My partners are by the bar, he said, whenever you're ready. She had not said yes to the dinner yet, but she realized, somewhere in her chest, that she already had, that the decision had made itself in the moment she had understood that this man was offering her a transaction and meant it as a transaction, and that transactions, at least, were honest about what they were. She had given 2 years to something that was never honest about what it was. She thought she could manage one evening. His business partners were named David Cho and Richard Ellis. David was Korean American, 2nd generation, with the particular energy of a man who had worked very hard to prove he belonged in rooms his parents had never entered. Richard was from Chicago, in his 50s, silver-haired, with the careful smile of someone who had learned to treat warmth as a negotiating tool. Both of them registered Naya's presence at Jun-Young's side with the specific kind of recalibration she had seen men do her entire adult life. The reassessment, the softening, the sudden willingness to be charmed. Jun-Young made the introductions easily, without over-explaining her. He put his hand lightly at the small of her back and said, "This is Naya. She's been very patient with me tonight." The way he said it implied a history, a private joke, something domestic and real. It was extraordinarily well done. "How did you two meet?" Richard asked, the way men at bars ask questions they already think they know the answer to. Nia opened her mouth, and Junyoung said, just a half-beat before her, "She approached me, actually. I was apparently standing in her way." "You were," she agreed, and there was enough truth in her voice that it landed exactly right. Richard laughed. David looked between them with an expression that wanted to be skeptical and was slowly losing the argument with itself. Nia understood what was happening. These men had spent 3 weeks watching Junyoung operate with machine-like precision and emotional distance, and they didn't trust what they couldn't read. A woman who had approached him, who had disrupted his careful stillness, who seemed unbothered by his intensity. This told them something they needed to hear. She played it just right. Not too warm, not too distant. She asked Richard about Chicago, and let him talk too long about it, which he took as intelligence on her part. She had spent years doing this, finding the angle of a person that made them feel seen without actually seeing her. It was a skill she had developed young, in a house where being invisible was safer than being present, and it had never entirely stopped being useful, which was a fact she tried not to think about too often. She let David refill her drink, then quietly slowed her own pace with it, which Junyoung noticed. She saw it in the faint shift of his attention, and said nothing about. She noticed him noticing. It was a strange loop, the two of them tracking each other while performing something entirely different for the men standing beside them. She had never been in a performance quite like this, a lie that required 2 people, a shared fabrication, and underneath it a series of small, rapid, wordless negotiations about how far and in what direction. The music from the festival floated up from below, muffled but present, a low heartbeat under the conversation. At some point, the 2 partners drifted into their own conversation about a contract clause, and Junyoung stood beside Nia in the relative quiet of that moment and said softly, "You're good at this." "So are you," she said. A beat. "I noticed you slowing down on the drink." "I noticed you noticing." He turned slightly toward her. Not enough to draw attention. "Were you always this careful, or did someone teach you to be?" It landed in an unexpected place, and she looked away before she answered. "A little of both." She paused. "My mother had very specific ideas about how much space a woman should take up. I learned early to take up less, and then I met someone who found ways to reduce it further." She didn't say Marcus's name. She didn't need to. Why, by the time I understood what was happening, being careful had become more comfortable than being open. She hadn't meant to say that much. The evening had loosened something she had kept tightly controlled, and she could feel the edges of it fraying in ways she would need to address later, privately, when she was alone, and could be honest with herself about how much tonight had already cost her in the currency of guardedness. He did not push. She was beginning to notice this about him, the specific discipline of his restraint, the way he held back not out of indifference but out of something more intentional. Most people who asked personal questions used the answers as a bridge to more questions, to greater intimacy, to connection that moved at the asker's preferred speed. Junyoung took what she offered and left the rest exactly where it was. It made her trust him in the same clinical way she had decided to trust him at the start, not emotionally, not yet, but structurally. The way you trust a building, not because you know its history, but because it has held weight in front of you. She allowed herself, then, to notice the warmth of him standing this close. Not physically. She had made herself very good at not registering that. But the warmth of someone who was actually paying attention, who had clocked the drink pace, who had blocked Marcus's sightline without being asked, who had looked at her at the beginning of the evening like someone assessing what she needed, rather than what he could take. She did not let herself name that feeling. Not then. Marcus had not reappeared. For now, for this moment, she was standing in a crowd of thousands, and she was invisible. It had been a long time since she felt invisible in a good way. She used to think invisibility was survival. Standing here, she was beginning to wonder if she had gotten the definition wrong, if the better word was not invisibility at all, but safety. And if safety could feel like this, warm and undemanding, a space with no cost attached, then she had been living without it far longer than 8 months. Far longer, probably, than she had been willing to admit. Dinner was at a rooftop restaurant 3 blocks from the festival grounds. Jun Young's car, quiet, dark, driven by someone who was clearly not only a driver, took them there in 10 minutes. David and Richard had gone ahead in their own car. In the back seat, alone for the first time, Nia and Jun Young sat with the specific awareness of 2 people who had been performing intimacy for an hour and were now suddenly not performing. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was, she thought, the quiet of 2 people who both knew how to be quiet, who had both learned, at some point, that silence was safer than filling space carelessly. She had spent years inside silence that was actually held breath, tension, the pre-storm quality of a room with a difficult person in it. This was different. This was the quiet of 2 people who had agreed, without saying so, that they were allowed to simply be here. Charlotte moved past the windows. She watched it. The late-night city, the lights in the restaurants, couples on sidewalks, the ordinary, miraculous texture of a Friday in August. She had forgotten, somewhere in the last 2 years, that ordinary life looked like this, that people moved through it without scanning constantly, that safety was not an achievement. It was supposed to be a baseline. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why, Charlotte, if you've been in the US for 3 weeks, why are you at a music festival in Charlotte instead of wherever the deal is being made?" He was quiet for a moment. "Richard's daughter performs here tonight. He mentioned it in passing 3 weeks ago. I remembered. I suggested we combine the trip." Another pause. It made him trust me slightly more. People trust you when you remember what they've said. She absorbed this. And that's very deliberate. Most things I do are. That must be exhausting. He turned his head and looked at her in the low light of the car, and for a moment his expression did something she couldn't quite categorize. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, but something that sat between the two, like a door opening onto a room he had not expected to be unlocked. "Yes," he said finally. "It is." She had not expected the honesty. It arrived without ceremony and settled in the space between them, and she found herself wanting to say something true in return, not from social obligation, but from the rare impulse to match someone's candor with her own. "I've been the same way," she offered, deliberate, calculated, for different reasons. She looked out the window again. "I used to think it made me strong. Now I mostly think it made me alone." He didn't rush to contradict her or fill that space with reassurance. She was beginning to understand that he treated honesty the same way he treated silence, as something that didn't need to be corrected or resolved, only received. At dinner, the performance continued, but it was easier now. They had developed, in only a few hours, a kind of shorthand. She knew when to laugh at something Jun Young said, not because he signaled her, but because she had learned enough of his rhythm to know when something landed as intended. He knew when to redirect Richard's questions away from her past, which Richard was beginning to warm toward, in the way that comfortably drunk men warm toward things they find charming and unfinished. They had built, without planning it, a rhythm that felt less like improvisation and more like something they had rehearsed in some prior life. Richard ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than Nia's weekly grocery budget and talked about it with the careful modesty of someone who wanted you to know he could afford it without appearing to want you to know. The view from the rooftop was the festival lights spread below like a second city, amber and blue, pulsing with sound she could feel in the floor. The night was warm, and the sky was cloudless, and David had, somewhere in the 3rd hour, relaxed enough to tell an actually funny story about his first business trip to Seoul, during which he had eaten something he had been convinced was tofu, and was not. Jun Young listened to the story with the expression of a man who had heard many versions of it, and found this one no worse than average. Somewhere in the 3rd hour, Richard said, "Jun Young, I'll be honest with you. I've been watching you very carefully since we started talking about this deal. He set down his glass. A man who can sit still the way you do, who doesn't need to perform. That either means you're hiding something, or you're very secure. It means the second thing, Jun-young said. Richard looked at Nia. And you, what do you think of him? She had not expected to be directly addressed, but she had been waiting for something like this. Some moment when the performance would require more than technique. When it would require something she actually believed. She looked at Jun-young, and in that moment she was not performing. She was simply looking at the man who had, in one evening, held space for her fear without making it his own, who had never once made her feel like a burden for it, who had been honest with her about his needs and held to exactly what he had promised, and had done small, unrequested things, the blocked sightline, the noted drink pace, the particular quality of his listening, that added up to a portrait of someone who understood that care was not a declaration, but a practice. I think, she said carefully, that he is one of the most self-possessed people I have ever met. And I mean that as a compliment. It's rare. Richard nodded slowly. Something, in his expression, resolved. David looked into his wine glass with the air of a man updating a prior conclusion. Jun-young looked at the table, but she saw, in the line of his jaw, something that was almost a smile. Almost. It was the smallest expression she had ever seen carry that much weight. They walked back from the restaurant through the festival grounds, because Jun-young said his car would circle around. They walked beside each other at the ease of people who had run out of reasons to maintain careful distance. And the festival crowd had thinned to something more manageable, couples and small groups, people sitting on the grass with their shoes off. The music slower now, a single guitar, and a voice that seemed to be addressing the night itself rather than any specific audience. She was thinking about the dinner, about Richard's expression when she had spoken, and the specific thing that had happened in her chest when she had looked at Jun-young and discovered she was not performing. She had spent all evening expecting the performance to feel like performance, to have the hollow quality of saying true-sounding things that didn't connect to anything real inside her. It had not felt hollow. She was still sorting through why. You didn't have to say what you said, Jun-young told her. I know. You could have said anything, something generic. He would have been satisfied. I said what I thought. He stopped walking, and she stopped too. And they were standing between two pools of warm light from the festival lanterns, and the guitar was still playing somewhere behind them, and the night air had that particular quality of late August evenings. Still warm, but with the first suggestion of something cooler underneath. The first signal that the year is beginning its long turn toward autumn. He looked at her with that quality of attention that she had been noticing all evening. Not penetrating, not invasive, not the attention of someone trying to get inside something, but complete. Like a person who actually saw what was in front of them, who did not overlay it with what they expected or wanted or needed it to be. She had not been looked at that way in a very long time. She was not sure she had ever been looked at that way, really, by someone who was not paid to do it or related to her. Tell me about the recording. The warmth of the evening went slightly cold. What? When you said he was more complicated than a boyfriend. That was precise phrasing. And earlier, when his man looked at you, you didn't reach for your phone or look for exits. You reached for your bag. Whatever you're protecting, it's in there. She stared at him. You read that from 20 feet away in a crowd. I read people. It's what I do. He waited. You don't have to tell me, but I think you should. She had a very practiced response to moments like this. A smile, a deflection, a redirect so smooth that the other person walked away, believing they had simply misread the situation. She had used it so many times it had become nearly reflexive. She could feel the mechanics of it queuing up even now, the smile beginning at the corners of her mouth, the sentence forming that would take the conversation somewhere harmless. But Jun-young was looking at her like someone who had already factored in the deflection, like it would not land, like he had allocated time for it and was prepared to wait through it to whatever was on the other side. That, more than anything, was what made her tell him. Not the evening, not the transaction, not the performance, though all of those had loosened something she kept tightly controlled. It was the specific experience of being looked at by someone who had already seen through the deflection and was waiting patiently for her to catch up. She had never had that experience before, and she did not know quite what to do with it, so she did the only thing that felt proportionate. She told the truth. She told him about the recording. Not everything. Not the whole 2 years of Marcus. The slow erosion. The ways he had made her feel like her own needs were a form of aggression. The way love had curdled into something she no longer had a clean word for. That would take more than one night and more trust than she had available. But she told him about the recording. 8 months ago. She had come home early from a work trip, a conference in Atlanta that ended a day ahead of schedule. She had let herself into the apartment she had stupidly let Marcus talk her into sharing. She had left her phone recording in her bag by accident. She had been testing a new voice memo app for work, and she had forgotten to stop it. And she had walked in on a meeting. 4 men, Marcus and 3 others, at the kitchen table with documents and a laptop and a tone in the room that made the air feel different, pressurized. She had walked in, and Marcus had gone very still and said her name in a voice she had never heard him use before, flat and precise and warning. And she had said she was tired, sorry, good night. And she had gone to the bedroom, and she had sat on the bed with her heart hammering and the recording running in her bag on the floor. And 2 days later, in the precise window when Marcus was at a meeting she had helped him schedule, she was gone. She had the recording by accident. She had listened to 12 minutes of it, and then stopped, because what she heard made her hands shake, and her understanding of the last 2 years rearrange itself entirely, like furniture moved in the dark. She had not listened again. She had not deleted it. She had not gone to the police, because 3 of the men in that recording had last names that would appear in a Google search alongside the words City Council and federal contracts. And she had understood instinctively, in the way that people understand things that are too large to think clearly about, that going to the police might be less safe than not going to the police. She finished, and the guitar was still playing, and the festival lanterns swayed slightly in a breeze she had not noticed until now. And the night had that enormous quality that certain nights have when something important has just been said out loud for the first time. Jun Young had not moved, not. He had listened the way he seemed to do everything, completely, without interrupting, without offering sympathy at the moments where most people would have inserted it because they felt the silence as their own discomfort rather than her truth. He had held the silence as hers. She had not known, until just now, that this was a thing a person could do. "Who were the men in the recording?" he asked. "I know 2 of the names, Marcus, obviously, and a man named Brennan. James Brennan." Something happened in Jun Young's face. It was extremely brief, a fraction of a second, and then it was gone, replaced by the same careful stillness. But she had been watching his face all evening. She had become, in the span of a few hours, fluent in its grammar. A small vocabulary of expressions, each one precise, each one meaning something specific. She had learned the not quite smile at dinner. She had learned the particular set of his jaw when he was deciding how much to say. She saw this one too. "You know that name," she said. A long pause. "Yes." The lanterns swayed. Somewhere behind them, a song ended, and a crowd applauded. And then the night went quieter. And in that quiet, the space between them felt very specific and very charged. "Tell me," she said. James Brennan was the reason Jun Young Kang had come to Charlotte. Not the music festival, not Richard Ellis's daughter performing, not the deal. Or rather, the deal was real, but it was not the whole story. The whole story was that Brennan was the silent partner in the company Jun Young was negotiating with. Brennan was the reason the deal had been stalling for 2 months, the reason every contract clause came back slightly altered in ways that seemed random until you mapped them together and realized they were designed to give Brennan's shell companies invisible leverage over a tech infrastructure project that would, if it went through, touch the data of roughly 4 million people. Jun Young's company had been tracking Brennan for 14 months. From Seoul, through intermediaries, through documents that passed through 7 jurisdictions before landing on the right desk. The work had been remote, careful, and inconclusive. The evidence kept stopping one step short of actionable. 3 weeks ago, Junyoung had made the decision that some things required physical presence. He had come to the US himself. The festival had not been a coincidence. Junyoung was in Charlotte because Brennan was in Charlotte. Because Brennan had a meeting this weekend with people Junyoung needed to identify. Faces to put to wire transfers. Names to put to voices. He told her this in the most careful, precise language of his career, standing between 2 festival lanterns with the guitar still playing, and he watched her face move through disbelief and then comprehension, and then something that looked like fury, but was actually the particular expression of a person whose suspicions have been confirmed at a scale larger than they were prepared for. "You came here for Brennan," she said. "Yes. And Marcus works with Brennan. Based on what you've described, it appears so. So, when I grabbed your arm in that crowd, it was not something I could have planned," he said. Which was true, and also not a complete answer to her question, and he thought she knew it. She looked at him for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" "The recording." She laughed, not warmly, a single short sound that carried everything the evening had cost her. "Of course. Nia." He said her name with a weight she hadn't heard in it before. "I need you to understand something. I was going to ask you this. I was not going to take it. There is a difference. People who plan to take things always say that." "I know." He didn't look away. "And you have no reason to believe me, but you asked me to stand between you and a dangerous man tonight, and I did. That was not part of any calculation. That was a choice." The quiet stretched between them, and in it, she sorted through everything the evening had given her. Every small data point. Every moment where he had been given the chance to be exactly as calculating as he described himself, and had done something slightly different instead. "If I give you the recording," she said finally, "what happens to Marcus? That depends on what's in it, and what happens to me. I will make sure nothing happens to you. A beat. That is not a transaction. That is a promise. There is a difference." She looked at him and she thought, "I am 27 years old, and I have spent most of my life handing my safety to people who dropped it. And here is a man I met 4 hours ago asking me to do it again." And she thought, but he hasn't dropped anything yet. She sat on a low wall near the festival's north exit, and she played him 12 minutes and 43 seconds of a recording she had not listened to in 8 months. She had forgotten how ordinary it sounded at the beginning. That was the thing she had tried to explain to herself in the weeks after she left. That there were no cinematic warning signs, no music that cued the audience to feel afraid. It sounded like 4 men in a kitchen having a business conversation in slightly lowered voices. It sounded, for the first 4 minutes, like something that could be explained away. She had spent weeks, in those early months, wondering if she had overreacted. If she had been paranoid. If the anxiety that Marcus had spent 2 years cultivating in her had finally fully colonized her judgment. Then the 5th minute arrived on the recording, and one of the men said a name, and another said a number, and someone laughed the way people laugh when consequences belong to other people, and Nia remembered exactly why her hands had been shaking. She looked at the festival lights, and did not watch Junyoung's face while the recording played. She did not want to see whatever moved across it. She did not want to calibrate her own reaction against his. He listened. He was completely still. She could feel the quality of his attention from 2 feet away, the way you can feel the presence of something dense, a weight without volume, a gravity. When it ended, he was quiet for a long time. The festival music drifted up from the grounds below them, slower now, end-of-night music, the kind that plays when a crowd has metabolized the energy of the evening and is moving toward something quieter. "Do you understand what you have?" he asked, enough to know it was dangerous. More than dangerous. He was choosing his words with even more care than usual, which she was beginning to understand was significant. Junyoung Kang always chose his words carefully, so when he paused longer than usual between them, it meant the words were load-bearing. "There are 4 voices in this recording, and I can identify all of them. One of them is Marcus. One of them is Brennan. The other two, one is a sitting U.S. Senator's chief of staff. The other is a man who, until 6 months ago, was under federal investigation and managed to walk away clean. A pause. This recording is direct evidence of wire fraud, money laundering, and coordination with at least one federally protected witness who appears to have been paid to change his testimony. The festival lights blurred slightly. She blinked. How do you know all of that from a 12-minute recording you just heard for the first time? Because I have been building a picture of Brennan's network for 14 months, he said. Some of these voices I have heard on other recordings. Some of these names I have seen in documents. What you gave me is not new information. It is the missing piece that connects what I had. The evidence has been circumstantial until now. What you have on that phone is not circumstantial. She sat with that. The specific, nauseating weight of realizing that something you had been trying to minimize, to explain away, to reduce to manageable size so that you could keep functioning, was, in fact, exactly as serious as you had feared. There was a particular humiliation in having talked yourself down from the truth. Nia, this is why he's looking for you. He knows the recording exists. He may not know you have it, but he knows someone does. How would he know? Because someone in that room had a reason to check, and they found the voice memo app running on your phone's cloud backup. He said it gently, but it arrived like a stone. They've known for months. They've been looking. She sat with that for a moment. 8 months of being careful, of new apartment, new city, new routines, of choosing her routes and changing her habits, and never quite being able to explain to herself why she hadn't felt safe even when nothing was happening. She had attributed it to trauma, to hypervigilance, to the lasting imprint of 2 years with Marcus. She had told herself she was healing, and she had meant it and believed it, and had also, quietly, never quite believed it, because something was happening. She just hadn't known it. She felt the familiar pull, the old pattern, the gravity of people who needed things from her that cost her everything. It had a specific texture, that feeling, like the moment before a door closes on a room you have been trying to leave. She recognized it because she had lived inside it for so long, and she looked at Jun Young Kong sitting beside her on this wall at the edge of a music festival, with the recording transferred and the festival winding down and the city going quiet around them. And she ran the numbers one more time. He had known about Brennan before she told him anything. He could have steered their conversation, engineered her confession, made her believe she was choosing freely while funneling her toward the outcome he needed. He had not done that. He had told her the truth about himself, his purpose, his deal, his need, and then he had waited. She thought about the walk, earlier, between the festival lanterns, the guitar, the way he had said, "That's over," not as comfort, not as reassurance designed to make her feel managed, but as the statement of a person who intended to make something true. She thought about the drink pace, the sightline, the hand at her waist that had been deliberate and appropriate, and had not tried to be more than what was needed. Every small thing added up. And the sum of them was a man who did what he said, and said what he meant, and had Guy, across one long and strange and consequential evening, given her no reason to revise that assessment downward. "What's the plan?" she said. The question surprised him. She could tell by the half-second before he answered. He had not expected her to skip the resistance. "I need to make 2 calls. I need to get the recording transferred to a secure channel. And I need to know if you're willing to speak to a federal contact, not police, not media, a specific person who has been building this case for a 1.5 years. Tonight? Tomorrow. Tonight. I need to get you somewhere Marcus cannot find you." She had spent 8 months finding that place on her own. She had been wrong every time, not catastrophically, not so wrong that Marcus had reached her, but wrong enough that the safety had never quite been real. It had been the appearance of safety, which she had accepted because it was what was available. The thought of letting someone else try was, in equal parts, terrifying and the most exhausted kind of relief she had ever felt. tired relief. The kind that comes not from joy, but from the end of sustained effort. "Okay," she said. He nodded once, reached for his phone, and then, before he dialed, he turned to her. "You've been carrying this alone for 8 months," he said. It was not a question. She didn't answer it as one. "Yeah, that's over," he said, not as comfort, as fact. She looked at the festival lights and she thought, "I do not know this man. I do not know his whole truth. I do not know yet whether this is the beginning of something or just a different kind of loss that happens to look like safety at the start." But she thought, he said, "That's over," like someone who intends to make it true. And she thought, "I've spent 2 years with someone who made things worse and called it love. I think I know the difference now. That's new." He found them at 11:47 p.m. She heard him before she saw him. The particular sound of his walk, unhurried, deliberate. The sound of a man who had never needed to hurry because the world had always waited. She had spent 2 years learning the sounds of Marcus, the way his footsteps changed when his mood changed, the specific silence that preceded his anger versus the one that preceded his charm. She had believed, until tonight, that she was done needing that knowledge. Jun-young was mid-sentence on a call when she put her hand on his arm, and he stopped talking immediately. He followed her stillness, and then her gaze, and then he ended the call in 4 words and put the phone in his pocket. Marcus stood 10 feet away, alone. His men were somewhere in the crowd, but not here, not visible. This was intentional. He had always preferred to handle delicate things personally. It was one of the things she had once, horribly, mistaken for intimacy. She understood now that it had simply meant no witnesses. "Nia," he said. He said her name the way he always had, with a particular ownership, like something he had filed under a category that belonged to him. She had once found that quality magnetic. She understood now that magnetism and control feel identical from inside the pull, and that the difference only becomes clear when you get far enough away to look back. She did not say anything. The old fear was there. She could feel it, physical and specific, in her hands and her sternum. But underneath it was something new, something that had been building quietly all evening in the company of a man who had made safety look like something other than a performance. She stood still, and she let herself feel both things at once, the old fear and the new steadiness, and she did not choose between them. She just stood there, holding both. Jun-young stepped slightly forward, not in front of her, not between them like a wall, but beside her, present. It was precise. It said, "She is not alone, and I know exactly why I am standing here. Marcus." He said the name without effect, the way you say a fact. Marcus looked at him for the first time, and something moved in his expression. A quick recalibration, fast enough that most people wouldn't catch it. She caught it. Jun-young Kang was not an unknown quantity to a man with Brennan's connections. The name meant the network. The network meant a kind of trouble that could not be managed with the tools Marcus preferred. "I don't know you," Marcus said. You know my company." Jun-young put his phone in his pocket, and his hands were completely still. "And through it, you know enough to know that this conversation should not happen. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her." "Then you should know," Jun-young said, with a quietness that carried more weight than volume, "that the conversation you want to have with her has already happened, through a different channel, and that the people who needed to hear certain things have now heard them." The warmth went out of Marcus's face completely. Not anger. She had braced herself for anger. What replaced it was something colder, the expression of a person calculating damage, assessing how much of the structure had already shifted and how far the collapse might reach. Nia watched him process this. She watched a man who had spent years making other people afraid experience, for a long moment, the specific quality of that feeling landing in his own chest. She did not feel satisfaction. She had expected to. What she felt instead was something quieter. Tired. Free. But the kind of free that takes time to feel like freedom rather than simply the sudden absence of weight. "You don't know what you've done," he said. And he was talking to her now. Not Jun Young. And his voice had that flat precision again. The one that had sent her to the bedroom 8 months ago. "I know exactly what I've done," she said. And her voice was steady, and it surprised her. Not that she could mean it, but that her body believed it too. That the steadiness was not performed. Marcus looked between them one more time. The calculation concluded. Then he turned and walked back into the crowd, with the precise, unhurried pace of a man who has made a decision and will not give anyone the satisfaction of watching him adapt. She watched him go until the festival swallowed him, and he was just gone. She stood and breathed. The festival lights were still moving, still warm, indifferent to everything that had just happened underneath them. Somewhere a drum kit started up. The final act of the night. The sound of something beginning at the moment. Everything else was ending, which felt like an appropriate metaphor for the entire evening. Jun Young said nothing for a long moment. The silence was not tension. It was the particular quiet that follows something significant, the held breath after a door closes, the moment before you understand what the room feels like now that it has changed. "Noam, are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Ask me tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed. And she heard in that word an intention, not to disappear, not to hand the problem off and step back to a safe distance, to still be there tomorrow and to ask, to follow through on the word as if it were a commitment, which, she was beginning to understand, was exactly how he treated words. The hotel Jun Young had arranged was quiet and out of the way, and overlooked the city from 12 floors up. His federal contact, a woman named Torres who spoke in complete, rapid sentences and seemed allergic to small talk, had arrived within 40 minutes of Jun Young's call and sat with Nia at a small table for 2 hours while Jun Young was in a different room on a different call. Torres asked her questions, and Nia answered them, and the recording was transferred and catalogued, and Nia signed something that Torres explained with enough detail that it was clear she had done this before, that she knew how to make witnesses feel like people rather than resources. There was a quality to Torres's efficiency that Nia found unexpectedly comforting. The efficiency of a woman who had done this many times, who did not treat Nia's situation as remarkable, which meant it was survivable. People who treated you as remarkable often meant they found your situation extreme. People who treated you as a matter of procedure meant they had seen your situation from the other side and knew what the other side looked like. Torres, before she left, looked at Nia across the small table and said, "You did the right thing. I know that's not a particularly comforting thing to hear right now, but in 6 months, you'll know it's true." Nia thanked her and meant it. When Torres finally left, Nia sat alone in the room for the first time since the festival, and the silence was enormous. It was the silence of a life that had been holding its breath for 8 months, and had just, in the span of one night, exhaled. She did not know yet what it would feel like to breathe normally again. She suspected it would take time. Most things that were unlearned rather than learned took longer than you expected. Jun Young knocked before he entered. She noticed that. "It's done," he said. "How long before Marcus knows? He may already. It doesn't matter. At this stage, what he does with the information cannot undo what's been started." He paused. "Torres says they may be able to move within the week. The recording combined with what they already had. It's significant." She nodded. The room felt very large. She felt, without quite expecting it, the approach of everything she had been holding back all evening. Every hour of the past 8 months compressing toward the present moment. All of it arriving now that there was finally nowhere else for it to go. She had been so focused on the task, the performance, the transaction, the danger, that she had not left any space for the feeling, and now the feeling had run out of patience. She thought she might cry and was annoyed at herself for it. She had not cried in 8 months. She had considered it, had felt the pressure of it behind her sternum at various points, but she had always found a reason not to. Crying felt like releasing something she might still need for insulation. She did not cry now either, but it was close. "You knew," she said. He sat down across from her. "What did I know?" "When I first mentioned Brennan, you knew immediately. You'd connected the dots before you told me." She looked at him. "How much did you put together before you told me the truth?" A pause. The honest kind. The kind that means the person is not choosing what to say, but how much. "I knew within a few minutes of your description. Yes. So you let me keep talking." "I needed to understand what you had, and I needed to know if you would tell me freely." "That's still a test." "Yes. You tested me." Nia. Her name, again, with that weight. "I am a man who has built his entire life on knowing who to trust and to what degree. I met you 2 hours before that conversation. I had no framework for you. I needed one. A beat. I did not manipulate you. I did not guide you. I waited to see what you would offer and what you would keep. That is not the same thing." She knew he was right. She also knew that right and painless were not the same thing. She had spent 2 years with a man who was always technically right about something while being fundamentally wrong about everything that mattered. And she had learned to distrust the feeling of being out-argued even when the argument was correct. But this was different. She could feel the difference, and she trusted her ability to feel it, which was itself something she had spent the last 8 months rebuilding. "I've been tested by people who loved me," she said quietly. "I'm very tired of it." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, something in it that was not calculation, not precision, but something rawer and less practiced. She had the sense of watching a door open in a building that kept most of its doors shut. "I understand that. And I'm sorry. Not for the caution. I cannot apologize for being careful. But for the fact that you've been handled that way by people who should have done better." A pause. "That is not what I was doing. I was not handling you. I was trying to understand you. Those are different things. And I should have been more transparent about which one I was doing." She looked at her hands. Outside, Charlotte was doing what cities do at 2 a.m., settling into its quieter self, the lights staying on but the noise softening, the late-night world taking over from the regular one. "I know," she said finally, and she meant it. The anger was real, but it was not about him. It was older than him, decades older, and she was tired of directing it at the nearest available target. He had not earned it. That was worth acknowledging. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not about the case, about you." He considered this with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. She watched him decide. "I have been managing other people's comfort with me my entire professional life. Being legible enough that they trust me, but not so legible that they underestimate me. Useful enough that they want me in the room, but contained enough that they don't fear what I might do in it." He was quiet for a moment. "Tonight, with you, was the first time in a very long time that I did not calculate what I was showing someone. I simply showed them. And I noticed it happening and I didn't stop it, which is the most unusual thing that has happened to me in years." She looked up at him. "That was frightening," he said. Not dramatically, just true. The way he said everything, as fact, as information, as something he had assessed and was now reporting without editorializing about whether he wished it were otherwise. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically either, just true. She did not sleep well, but she slept. Jun Young had arranged the room and left without ceremony, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. The absence of an expectation. The clear understanding that what had passed between them was real and also did not entitle him to anything further. There was no debt implied. There was no performance required. He had said goodnight, and he had meant goodnight, and the door had closed, and she had been alone with the largest silence she had been inside in 8 months. In the morning, Charlotte was quiet and gold, and she ordered coffee from room service and sat by the window and thought about Nia Sterling, the version that had existed before Marcus, before the recording. before the particular education of the last 2 years, and whether she was recoverable. She thought, yes, she thought. She was always recoverable. She had just been waiting in the wrong places, looking for the wrong signs, measuring herself by the wrong instruments. She had been using other people's assessments of her as the primary data point, which meant that when those assessments were distorted, she distorted with them. She understood this now in the intellectual way you understand something after the fact. The kind of understanding that arrives too late to prevent the wound but is still worth having, because it changes how you dress it. She thought about Kezia, in London, who had bought this festival ticket with her, who did not know everything, but who would listen to everything if Nia called her. She had been not calling Kezia for 8 months, protecting her from a weight she had decided to carry alone. She thought, I am going to call her. I am going to tell her the whole thing, start to finish. Not because she needs to know, but because I need someone to know. That was new, too. Jun Young knocked at 9. He had coffee already, 2 cups, and he offered her one without pretending he hadn't brought it for her. Torres called this morning, he said. They moved faster than expected. There were arrests overnight. Marcus is in federal custody, Brennan as well. He said it without triumph. Just information, delivered with the same precision he gave everything, as if triumph were a form of imprecision. She sat with it. The fist in her chest, which had been there for 8 months, and which she had become so accustomed to that she had almost stopped feeling it, opened slowly, like a hand releasing something it had held too long. The absence of it was enormous. She hadn't known it would feel like that, like a room where a piece of furniture has been moved, the space where it was somehow louder than the space around it. Okay, she said. He looked at her carefully. How do you feel? Like a person who just put down something very heavy. She looked at her coffee. And a little, like I don't know what to do with my hands. He almost smiled. It was the same not quite smile she had seen in the restaurant last night, small and controlled, and somehow more expressive than a full smile would have been, and it arrived in the same place it had then, somewhere near the center of her chest, which was still getting used to not being a fist. What happens to you now? She asked. The deal. The deal is complicated. Without Brennan's silent interference, some of the structure changes. I'll need to renegotiate. A pause. I'll be in the U.S. for several more weeks at least. She nodded. She noticed that he was looking at her in a way that was slightly different from the way he had looked at her all of last night. Last night had been the look of a man reading a situation, assessing variables, tracking information. This was the look of a man who had already completed that process and was now looking at something that interested him for an entirely different reason. For reasons that had nothing to do with what she knew or what she carried. For reasons that were about her. She noticed this, and she let herself notice it, which was itself something she had not done in a long time, simply allowing a feeling to exist, rather than immediately assessing whether it was safe or warranted, or likely to be returned. I need to go back to Atlanta, she said. I have things to figure out. The apartment, the job. I left a lot of things half-finished because I was afraid to finish them. I want to go back and finish them. That makes sense. I'm saying I need time. I heard you. He said it evenly, without retreating, without the particular quality that people have when they're masking disappointment with acceptance. He simply heard her, and held it. I'm not asking for anything, Nia. Last night was... He paused, searching for the word with the same precision he gave everything, refusing to settle for a word that didn't fit, more than I expected. That's a true statement. I'm not sure what it means yet. I'm comfortable not knowing for a while. It was more than I expected, too. She looked at him. You're the most honest person I've spoken to in 2 years. And the most complicated? That's a difficult combination. I know. I'm not saying no to whatever this is. She gestured at the space between them, the invisible architecture of the evening still hanging there, not quite gone. I'm saying not yet. And not fast. He nodded. And she could see, in the small, careful landscape of his face, that he understood, and that he could be patient, that patience was something he had in extraordinary supply, and that he would apply it here the same way he applied it to everything else, completely, without resentment, without performing the waiting as a kind of pressure. "I'll be in Atlanta in 2 weeks," he said. "And there's a meeting with a technology foundation board. I could let you know I'll be there, and you could decide at that point whether you'd like to have coffee." "Coffee," she said, with a small, real smile that surprised her by its realness. "Very uncomplicated. I am capable of uncomplicated things. I'm beginning to believe that." Outside, the city was gold, and the morning was long, and the festival was over, its lights packed away, its music folded back into the air. She sat by the window with her coffee, and Junyoung Kang sat across from her in the morning quiet, and neither of them needed to fill the space with anything. It sat between them, full and comfortable, the particular quiet of two people who had already said the things that mattered and were now simply in the aftermath of them, which was its own kind of intimacy. This, she thought, was also new. This quiet that did not feel like danger. This stillness that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like something beginning instead of something ending. Not the sharp beginning of a story you've started before and already know the shape of. Something else. Something whose shape she could not see yet, which was precisely what made it feel, for the first time in years, like it was worth finding out. Nia Sterling was 28 years old when she testified before a federal grand jury in a case that eventually resulted in 11 indictments, 3 convictions, and the restructuring of a city council office that had been quietly redirecting public funds for 9 years. She testified calmly, in complete sentences, and the prosecutor later told her that she was the clearest witness he had ever worked with. She went back to Atlanta, and she finished things. The apartment lease, the job, which she left. Eventually, not out of fear, but because she had spent 2 years doing careful, important work while suppressing the thing she actually wanted, which was to start a community arts program in the neighborhood where she had grown up. She started it. It was small. It grew. Junyoung Kang closed his American deal in October, 6 weeks behind the original schedule, under entirely different terms, better ones, as it turned out, without Brennan's invisible hands in the structure. He called it a delayed success. His board called it a complete success. Junyoung had turned 34 in September, quietly, in a city that was not Seoul, which was the first birthday in 11 years he had spent outside Korea. He did not mention this to anyone except Naya, who sent him a message at midnight that said only, "Happy birthday, complicated man." He kept the message. He did not analyze why. He had coffee with Naya in Atlanta in September. Just coffee. He had promised uncomplicated, and he meant it. The second time they met, it was dinner, which was his suggestion but which she had been about to make, and they met in the middle of the sentence. The third time they met, it was a weekend in Savannah, where they walked along the waterfront, and she told him things she had never told anyone, and he listened the way he always listened, completely, without inserting himself into the center of it. And then he told her things she had not expected, about a father who had never been satisfied, and a version of himself that had lived entirely inside the expectations of others before he had the resources to build something of his own. They were, it turned out, made of similar materials, compressed by similar histories, shaped by similar choices into people who were careful with themselves and had, in one unexpected August night, been less careful than usual and found something real in the gap. It was not an easy relationship. He lived between Seoul and New York, and she was building something in Atlanta that required her presence and her attention and everything she had. They negotiated distance and time, and the particular difficulty of two people who had both spent years protecting themselves trying to figure out how to let the protection have a door. But it was, from the beginning, honest, entirely, sometimes uncomfortably honest. And for Nia Sterling, who had spent most of her adult life surrounded by beautiful untruths, honest was the most romantic thing anyone had ever offered her. She kept the dance, too. The memory of it. The moment she had grabbed a stranger's arm in a crowd because she was running from the worst version of her past and had stumbled, accidentally, into the first steps of something better. She told the story sometimes, at the arts program, to young women who needed to hear it, that the bravest thing she had ever done was not testifying, not starting the program, not any of the large invisible choices. It was turning to a stranger and saying, "Can you hold this moment with me? I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for right now." And then learning, slowly, that right now could grow into something neither of them had names for yet. Something that looked, if you stood far enough back, like everything. Subscribe for new stories every day. You won't want to miss what's coming. Comment below. Did you see the twist coming? Team Nia or Team Jun Young?